My name is Grace Kellar-Long.
And my name is Sam Kellar-Long.
And our senior group performance is entitled, What is the City But the People?
Jane Jacobs' stand against the Lower Manhattan Expressway.
Following World War II, redesigning cities for the automobile became the norm of urban planning. Through urban renewal, old neighborhoods were replaced with new roads and high-rise housing. In response, Jane Jacobs wrote The Death and Life of Great American Cities in 1961. In her book, she took a stand for pedestrian-based urban planning decisions that kept neighborhoods in mind.
When Robert Moses proposed the Lower Manhattan Expressway, Jane Jacobs continued her stand by leading the successful opposition against it. Her writings and community advocacy helped change the focus of urban planning to walkability and public transit that maintains a city's architecture and culture. Her book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, inspired the new urbanist movement and is now used as a template for neighborhood-based urban planning across the country.
This is Letitia Kent, here with Robert Moses, the head city planner in New York, to hear his perspective on the new Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956.
It's a pleasure to be here.
How will this new law affect city planning in New York?
With this new act, I will be able to continue my work for New York City. I have built 13 bridges, 637 miles of highways, 658 playgrounds, and 10 public swimming pools, and have demolished more than 20 slums. Now that the federal government will fund 90% of any approved addition to the primary highway system, constructing highways will be one of my top priorities. One of the highways I plan on building is the Lower Manhattan Expressway. It will connect the Williamsburg Bridge to the Holland Tunnel, cutting through and eliminating 5 of Manhattan's most unsightly slums.
Why are you making this your priority?
Constructing a network of highways is exactly what America needs. In the past decade, the number of cars on our nation's roads has doubled. We need to create cities that can keep up.
Thank you for speaking with us.
The new projects created under the Federal Aid Highway Act angered many citizens, including Jane Jacobs, a resident of Greenwich Village, which had been designated as one of Manhattan's worst slums. Her community was going to be destroyed by highways, and she would not stand for it. After giving a speech at Harvard with the magazine Architectural Forum, where she worked as a staff writer, her ideas received a lot of publicity. She received a Rockefeller grant to continue her research in city planning, and her first book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, was published shortly afterward in 1961.
Jane Jacobs' book presented revolutionary urban planning ideas. She argued that cities became safer when neighborhoods were mixed use and when streets were planned for people. She took a stand against previously lauded city development projects like skyscrapers and expressways that destroyed thriving communities. Her book was a huge success, read across the country by ordinary citizens and urban planners alike. However, it angered many urban planners because it argued that their automobile-centered work was ineffective. The book's publisher, Bennett Cerf, sent a copy to Robert Moses. He responded,
Dear Bennett Cerf, I am returning the book you sent me. Aside from the fact that it is intemperate and inaccurate, it is also libelous. Sell this junk to someone else.
Jane Jacobs took a stand for the principles described in her book by leading protests against Robert Moses' Lower Manhattan Expressway in 1968. Thank you for being here, everyone. We all know that this expressway is a disaster. Urban renewal projects like this one are destroying American cities. Robert Moses calls our neighborhood a slum, but here in Greenwich Village, we know that we are nothing of the sort. Our old architecture, culture, and minority communities are what make us thrive, and Robert Moses is trying to take that away. To prepare for the next Lomex protest, it's important to be watching while Robert Moses makes his remarks on television. Let's hear what he has to say.
The Lower Manhattan Expressway is a great advancement for New York City. It will demolish ghastly slums while improving the flow of traffic through the city. This expressway will better the quality of life for everybody.
Not quite for everybody. The families and businesses in the path of the expressway will just have to pick up, move out, and start all over.
And for all of you worrying about the businesses, they will simply be moved to another location. They will continue successfully there.
Yet a study done by Robert Moses' own department showed that 90% of displaced businesses fail.
The only important thing that will be destroyed is the old fire station, and they have been wanting a new one.
The only important thing? Lomex will destroy 5 of the oldest neighborhoods in New York.
This expressway will be the best thing that has ever happened for the people of Manhattan.
The people of Manhattan? Nobody in the city will benefit from this. This expressway will only help people in the suburbs commuting through Manhattan. Friends, come to a hearing for the Lower Manhattan Expressway at Seward Park High School this Wednesday, April 17th. This is our last chance to protect our community and stop Lomex from destroying Greenwich Village and all of Manhattan. We need to show Robert Moses that cities are for people, not cars. Excuse me, Mr. Moses?
Come on in. How was the Seward Park hearing? Are we all ready to start building my expressway?
Well, it didn't go quite as planned. There were a lot more people than expected.
What? We purposely scheduled it so that very few people would be able to attend.
Don't underestimate Jane Jacobs and her committee to stop the Lower Manhattan Expressway. The auditorium was packed. Lots of people spoke out against the expressway, but it got even worse when Jane Jacobs herself arrived. She monopolized the microphone and even started critiquing the hearing itself, saying we had scheduled it without enough warning.
Did nobody remind her of the time limit?
They did, but she somehow managed to lead most of the crowd in a silent march up and across the stage, putting a complete halt to the hearing.
Surely the officers in attendance put a stop to that.
They did. They arrested her for riot charges.
Wonderful.
But not before the crowd managed to destroy the stenographer's notes.
What? You realize that without those notes, there is no record of the hearing, and we have no evidence of having received public opinion as required by law.
I'm afraid this may be the end of the Lower Manhattan Expressway.
Thanks to the protests led by Jane Jacobs, the expressway was never built. Robert Moses retired as urban renewal in New York fell out of favor, and many of the communities that would have been destroyed were named historic neighborhoods through the Landmark Preservation Act, protecting them from future demolition.
However, Jane Jacobs' legacy extends beyond preserving Manhattan neighborhoods. Her writings and protests changed the way urban planners think about urban planning. They now focus on citizens instead of cars, emphasizing public transit and the importance of streets made for people.
My name is Ron Schiffman, and I am very happy to be here celebrating Jane Jacobs' 100th birthday. Jane Jacobs has had a large impact on my life and my career in urban planning. Back in the 1960s, I attended one of Jane Jacobs' speeches against the proposed development plan in Brooklyn. She inspired me to focus my career on working with community members to create walkable neighborhoods. I worked with the Bedford-Stuyvesant neighborhood to prevent a development that would have destroyed buildings, and instead preserve the neighborhood by improving existing ones. Many other urban planners have been inspired by Jane Jacobs, and one of them is our next speaker, Elizabeth Plater-Zyberk.
Thanks, Ron. Jane Jacobs has had an enormous impact on my profession and has changed the methods of urban planners around the world. My husband and I used her ideas when founding our Congress for the New Urbanism. We've created small, dense, walkable communities that do not rely on cars for transportation. All principles that Jane Jacobs originally wrote about in her books and then stood for in her protests. Jane Jacobs' ideas have guided the Congress to become what we are today. After starting with just a small beachside community in Florida called Seaside, we now have over 400 projects across the country. New urbanist towns are a small window into our country's urban future.
Jane Jacobs not only wrote about cities, she fought for them. By putting her principles into action and taking a stand against the Lower Manhattan Expressway, she left a legacy of urban planners who take public opinion into account and create thriving communities.
Because of Jane Jacobs and her book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, automobile-based urban planning has fallen out of favor, as urban planners realize that the key to creating thriving communities is by putting people first.
Thank you.